The rain fell in slick, oily sheets over the cobblestone streets of Old Verona Heights, a forgotten district where the city's history clung to every cracked brick and iron balcony. Elara Vance stood under the narrow awning of a closed bakery, her thick fingers clutching a leather satchel, swollen with documents. The satchel was as old as her profession, its straps worn soft by years of digging through archives, church basements, and dusty municipal offices. She was a genealogist, and a damn good one, but tonight, her heart hammered against her ribs, not from the thrill of discovery, but from the weight of what she was about to walk into. The invitation, if you could call it that, had arrived 3 days ago, on heavy cream paper, embossed with a serpent coiled around a cross, the Vitale family crest. Everyone in the city knew the Vitales. They owned half the legitimate businesses and all of the illegitimate ones. Their patriarch, Don Emilio Vitale, was a man who smiled like a grandfather and ordered executions like a general. And now, they wanted her. Elara Vance, the plus-size woman who spent her weekends in cemeteries photographing headstones, who could trace a bloodline back to the 1600s through nothing but baptismal records and ship manifests. They wanted her to verify their lineage before a merger with the Castellano family, a union that would consolidate the entire underworld into one unbreakable empire. She had almost said no. Every instinct screamed at her to burn the letter and pretend it never arrived, but the fee they offered was enough to save her mother's house from foreclosure, enough to pay off the medical debts that had been suffocating them for years. And there was something else, a whisper in the back of her mind, the genealogist's curse, the need to know. The Vitale family tree was notoriously tangled, full of gaps and contradictions that had puzzled historians for decades. The chance to see their private records, to fill in those blanks, was irresistible. A black sedan with tinted windows pulled up to the curb, its engine a low, threatening purr. The door opened, and a man in a suit that cost more than Elara's entire wardrobe stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had been handsome once before it was rearranged by too many fights. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, pulling the eye slightly downward in a permanent, unsettling wink. "Miss Vance?" His voice was gravel over silk. "Yes." She tightened her grip on the satchel. "I'm Luca. Don Emilio sent me. Get in." "No, please." No smile. Just an expectation of obedience. Elara squared her shoulders, a movement that made her generous curves shift under her navy blue coat. She was not a small woman. She never had been. Her body was a landscape of soft hills and wide valleys, a body that had been mocked, dismissed, and underestimated her entire life. She had learned to move through the world with a quiet defiance, a refusal to shrink. So she did not shrink now. She walked to the car with her head high, her sensible heels clicking on the wet stones, and slid into the back seat. The interior smelled of leather, and something sharper, like anise or maybe danger. Luca got in beside her, and the car pulled away from the curb, gliding through the rain-slicked streets toward the Vitale estate. Elara stared out the window, watching the city transform. The cramped, colorful buildings of Old Verona Heights gave way to wide boulevards, lined with plane trees, then to gated drives and manicured hedges. The Vitale mansion sat on a hill overlooking the river, a sprawling neoclassical monstrosity, with columns and fountains and windows that glowed like watchful eyes. When the car stopped, Luca opened her door and led her up a sweeping staircase to a massive oak door. Inside, the foyer was a cathedral of marble and gold. A chandelier the size of a small car hung from the ceiling, its crystals throwing fractured light across the faces of the people waiting for her. And there were many of them, The Vitale family had turned out in force, not to welcome her, but to inspect her. Elara felt their gazes like needles, pricking at her damp coat, her sensible shoes, her round cheeks flushed from the rain. A woman stepped forward. She was tall and razor-thin, draped in a black silk dress that clung to her like a second skin. Her hair was a sheet of platinum blonde, her lips painted the color of dried blood. This was Isabella Vitale, the Don's eldest daughter, a woman known for her sharp tongue and sharper business instincts. "So," Isabella said, her voice carrying through the marble hall, "this is the famous genealogist, the one who digs through dead people's papers for a living." She looked Elara up and down, her smile a thin, cruel line. "I expected someone older, and perhaps a bit less substantial." A ripple of laughter moved through the gathered relatives. Elara saw them, slim men in tailored suits, sleek women in designer gowns, all of them polished and perfect and utterly predatory. They looked at her the way cats look at a mouse that has wandered into their territory, not with hunger, but with the promise of a cruel game. Elara did not flinch. She had been called fat, chubby, hefty, big-boned, and 1,000 other euphemisms for not thin since she was a child. The words had lost their power to wound her directly, though they still left a dull ache, a reminder that the world was not built for bodies like hers. "I'm 34, she said calmly, "and my size has no bearing on my ability to read a parish register. Unless your family records are stored on a scale, I think we'll manage." The laughter stopped. Isabella's eyes narrowed, the smile freezing on her face. Before she could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Enough, Isabella." The crowd parted, and Don Emilio Vitale emerged. He was not a tall man, but he carried himself with the weight of absolute authority. His hair was silver, swept back from a high forehead, and his eyes were the color of winter slate. He wore a simple black suit, but the simplicity was deceptive. The fabric was cashmere, the cut impeccable. He walked with a cane, not because he needed it, but because it was a beautiful thing, ebony, with a silver serpent's head, and because it made people nervous. "Miss Vance," he said, extending his hand. His grip was cool and dry, surprisingly gentle. "Thank you for coming. I apologize for my daughter. She forgets that manners cost nothing and buy everything." Isabella's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. "Please," Don Emilio continued, gesturing toward a hallway, "let's speak in my study. Luca, bring us some coffee and something to eat. Miss Vance has had a long journey." The study was a sanctuary of dark wood and old books. A fire crackled in a massive hearth, and the air smelled of tobacco and leather. Don Emilio settled into a high-backed chair, behind a desk cluttered with papers, and Elara took the seat opposite him, her satchel balanced on her lap. "I'll be direct," the Don said. "In 2 weeks, my grandson, Alessandro, is marrying Sofia Castellano. This marriage will unite our families and create an organization that will control this city for generations. But before that happens, the Castellanos have demanded a full verification of our bloodline. They are old-fashioned. They believe that power must pass through the blood, that a true heir carries the strength of his ancestors. They want proof that Alessandro is a direct descendant of my father, and his father before him, all the way back to the founding of our family in Sicily. And you need me to provide that proof," Elara said. "I need you to confirm what we already know," Don Emilio said. "The Vitales have kept meticulous records, baptisms, marriages, deaths. They are all here, in this house. I will give you access to everything. You will trace the line from me to Alessandro, and you will present your findings at the merger ceremony, a public verification, to satisfy the Castellanos. and to silence anyone who might question our legitimacy. Elara's mind was already racing. Access to the Vitale family archives. It was a genealogist's dream. But she also knew that families like this did not invite outsiders into their secrets without risk. And if I find something unexpected? Don Emilio's eyes flickered, just for a moment. There will be nothing unexpected. My family is what it is. But if you do find some small discrepancy, some clerical error from 100 years ago, you will bring it to me privately. We will handle it discreetly. It was not a request. It was a command, wrapped in the velvet of his voice. Elara nodded slowly. I understand. Good. Luca will show you to your room. You will stay here for the duration of your work. The archives are in the East Wing. You will have everything you need. Luca appeared as if summoned, and Elara followed him out of the study, through a maze of corridors, and up a flight of stairs to a guest room that was larger than her entire apartment. The bed was a 4-poster monstrosity, draped in silk, and the windows overlooked the river, now a dark ribbon under the rain. Luca left her without a word, and Elara stood alone in the center of the room, her satchel still clutched to her chest. She did not sleep well that night. The bed was too soft, the silence too heavy. She kept thinking about the way Isabella had looked at her, the way the other relatives had laughed. She thought about Don Emilio's calm, measured words, and the flicker in his eyes when he mentioned unexpected findings. And she thought about the archives waiting for her in the East Wing, a treasure trove of secrets that no outsider had ever seen. The next morning, she began her work. The East Wing archive was a long, narrow room, lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves, leather-bound ledgers, yellowed envelopes tied with ribbon, stacks of photographs, and boxes of loose papers filled every inch of space. A large oak table sat in the center of the room, and Elara spread her tools across it: a magnifying glass, a laptop, a notebook, and a set of colored pencils she used to mark connections in family trees. She started with the most recent records: Don Emilio's own birth certificate, his marriage license, the birth certificates of his children. Alessandro's documents were there too, crisp and official. According to the papers, Alessandro Vitale was the son of Marco Vitale, Don Emilio's second son, and a woman named Lucia Ferrara. Marco had died in a boating accident when Alessandro was an infant, and Lucia had passed away from cancer a few years later. Alessandro had been raised by Don Emilio and his late wife, groomed from childhood to be the heir. Elara worked backward, tracing Marco's line to Don Emilio, then Don Emilio's line to his father, Giovanni Vitale. The records were indeed meticulous, but as she dug deeper, she began to notice small inconsistencies. A baptismal record for Giovanni listed his godparents as a couple named Russo, but a later family tree, drawn by a Vitale aunt, listed them as the Morettis. A ship manifest from 1902 showed a Giuseppe Vitale arriving in New York with a wife named Maria, but a marriage certificate from the same year listed the wife as Anna. These were the kinds of discrepancies that made Elara's heart beat faster. They were not necessarily evidence of anything sinister. Names were often recorded incorrectly, memories faded, families lied to cover up premarital pregnancies or inconvenient deaths. But they were threads, and Elara was a woman who pulled at threads. She spent 3 days in the archives, emerging only for meals that were brought to her room by silent servants. She did not see the family, which suited her fine. The less she had to endure Isabella's sharp comments and the other relatives' dismissive glances, the better. But on the 4th day, as she was cross-referencing a church record from a small parish in Sicily, the door to the archive opened, and a man walked in. He was tall, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of amber. He wore a simple white shirt, with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle, and his jaw was shadowed with stubble. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who owned the room, but there was something else in his expression, a flicker of curiosity, maybe even wariness. "You must be the genealogist," he said. His voice was deeper than she expected, with a rough edge that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Elara Vance," she said, standing. Her chair scraped against the floor, and she was suddenly aware of how she must look. Hair escaping from its bun, glasses perched on her nose, surrounded by piles of ancient paper. "Alessandro Vitale." He stepped closer, and she caught his scent, sandalwood, and something darker, like smoke. "My grandfather told me you were here. I wanted to see the woman who's going to prove I'm a real Vitale." There was a strange note in his voice, something that might have been sarcasm, or might have been something else entirely. Elara studied his face. He was handsome, undeniably so, but there were shadows under his eyes, and a tension in his jaw that spoke of sleepless nights. "I'm not here to prove anything," she said carefully. "I'm here to trace the facts. The facts will speak for themselves." Alessandro smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Facts. Right. And what have your facts told you so far?" "It's too early to say. I'm still working through the early 20th century records." He nodded, walking around the table to look at the documents spread across it. His fingers brushed the edge of a baptismal certificate, and Elara noticed that his hands were not the soft hands of a pampered heir. They were calloused, the knuckles slightly scarred, hands that had seen violence. "My grandfather thinks this is all a formality," Alessandro said. "The Castellanos are superstitious. They want a bloodline guarantee, like it's a warranty on a car. But you and I both know that families are never as clean as the paperwork suggests." Elara's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. "I mean that every family has secrets. The Vitales have more than most. Just be careful what you dig up, Miss Vance. Some bones are buried for a reason." Before she could respond, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing in the silence with her heart pounding and her mind spinning. What did he know? What was he warning her about? She threw herself back into the work with renewed intensity. The discrepancies she had found were multiplying. A death certificate for a child named Rosa Vitale, dated 1918, but no corresponding birth certificate. A marriage record that listed the groom's mother as unknown. A series of letters, written in Italian, between a Vitale ancestor and a woman who signed herself only as C. The letters were full of longing and regret, and they hinted at a child, a boy, who had been sent away. Elara began to build a second family tree, a shadow tree, alongside the official one. She used her colored pencils to mark connections: red for blood, blue for marriage, green for discrepancies. The shadow tree was tangled and strange, full of gaps and question marks, but one pattern began to emerge, a pattern that made her blood run cold. According to the official records, Alessandro's father, Marco, had been born in 1965 to Don Emilio and his wife Rosa, but Elara found a hospital record from a small clinic in Naples, dated 1965, that listed the birth of a boy to a woman named Rosa Vitale, but the father was listed as unknown. The baby's footprint was on the record, a tiny inked swirl. Elara compared it to the footprint on Marco's official birth certificate, the one filed in the city registry. They did not match. Her hands trembled as she laid the documents side by side. The official birth certificate listed the father as Emilio Vitale, and the footprint was different, larger, with a distinct gap between the first and second toes. The hospital record showed a smaller foot, the toes close together, two different babies. She dug deeper, her heart racing. She found immigration records showing that Rosa Vitale had traveled to Naples alone in early 1965, supposedly to visit a sick aunt. She had stayed for 6 months, returning to the United States with an infant she claimed was her son. But the ship manifest listed the baby's name as Infant Male Vitale, with a note in the margin. Born at sea? Mother unclear. Elara sat back in her chair, her mind reeling. If Marco was not Don Emilio's biological son, then Alessandro was not a blood Vitale. The entire line of succession was a lie. But why? Who had orchestrated this? And why had Don Emilio never discovered it? The answer came 3 days later, buried in a packet of letters tied with a black ribbon. The letters were written by Rosa Vitale herself, addressed to a sister who had died years ago. They had been hidden in a false bottom of an old trunk, and Elara found them only because she had noticed the trunk's dimensions didn't match its interior depth. The letters told a story of desperation and sacrifice. Rosa had been unable to carry a pregnancy to term. She had suffered multiple miscarriages, and the doctors had told her she would never have a living child. But Don Emilio needed an heir. His position in the family, his very life, depended on producing a son to carry on the Vitale name. Without an heir, his rivals would move against him, and Rosa would be cast aside, replaced by a woman who could give him children. So Rosa had devised a plan. She had traveled to Naples, where her family had connections to a network of midwives and orphanages. She had found a pregnant woman, a young, desperate woman, who could not keep her child, and had arranged to take the baby as her own. The hospital record was real. The baby was born to the unknown woman, but Rosa had paid the clinic to falsify the records, to list her as the mother. Then she had returned to America with the infant, passing him off as her son, as Emilio's son. The letters were full of guilt and fear. Rosa wrote about how she loved the boy, how she raised him as her own, but how she lived in terror of discovery. She wrote about the other child, too. The woman in Naples had given birth to twins, one boy who became Marco, and another boy, smaller and sickly, who had been left at an orphanage. Rosa had always wondered what had happened to that second child, but she had never dared to search for him. Elara's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the letters. This was not just a discrepancy. This was a bombshell that would destroy the Vitale family, shatter the merger with the Castellanos, and possibly get her killed. She needed to tell Don Emilio, as she had promised, but something held her back. Alessandro's warning echoed in her mind. Some bones are buried for a reason. She decided to dig deeper before revealing anything. If Rosa had taken one twin, what had happened to the other? She began searching orphanage records from Naples, immigration files, anything that might trace the second boy. It took her 2 more days of relentless work, but she found him. The second twin had been adopted by an American couple in 1968, a pair of missionaries who had been working in Italy. They had named him Samuel, and they had brought him back to the United States, to a small town in Ohio. Samuel had grown up, married, and had a daughter. That daughter's name was Clara Rossi, and Clara Rossi, according to a recent marriage certificate, was now living in the Vitale mansion. Elara stared at the document, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. Clara Rossi had married into the Vitale family 3 years ago. She was the wife of a minor cousin, a man named Paolo Vitale, who was known for his drinking and his gambling, and his complete lack of ambition. Clara herself was a quiet, unassuming woman, a plus-size woman, Elara remembered suddenly, with soft brown hair and a shy smile. She had seen Clara at the dinner table on the first night, sitting at the far end, ignored by everyone, her husband sneering at her when he bothered to notice her at all. Clara Rossi was the true blood heir, the daughter of the second twin, the direct descendant of Don Emilio's wife's secret. She was the rightful Vitale, not Alessandro. Elara's first instinct was to find Clara and tell her everything, but she forced herself to be cautious. She did not know Clara. She did not know if Clara would believe her, or if Clara would run to her husband, or if Clara would confront Don Emilio and get them both killed. She needed more information. She needed to understand the dynamics of this family before she made her move. Over the next few days, Elara began to observe. She attended meals in the grand dining room, enduring the cold stares, and whispered comments from Isabella and the others. She watched Alessandro, who sat at his grandfather's right hand, his face a mask of calm confidence that Elara now knew was a lie. And she watched Clara. Clara was invisible. That was the only word for it. The family treated her like a piece of furniture, a mildly embarrassing piece that they wished they could throw out but couldn't quite justify. Paolo, her husband, barely spoke to her, except to criticize her weight, her clothes, her inability to produce a child. The other women, led by Isabella, excluded her from conversations, turned their backs when she entered a room, and made snide remarks about her peasant background. But Elara saw something else in Clara, a quiet strength, a way of holding herself, even when she was being humiliated, that spoke of deep reserves of dignity. And once, when Elara caught Clara's eye across the table, she saw a flash of something. Intelligence, maybe, or a shared understanding of what it meant to be a plus-size woman in a world that valued thinness above all else. Elara began to find excuses to be near Clara. She lingered in the garden where Clara liked to walk in the afternoons. She sat in the library where Clara sometimes read, and slowly, carefully, she began to build a connection. It started with a simple comment about a book Clara was reading, a historical novel set in Renaissance Italy. Elara mentioned that she had traced her own family back to that period, and Clara's eyes lit up with genuine interest. They talked for an hour that first day, about history and family, and the strange pull of the past. Clara was smart, much smarter than anyone in the Vitale family gave her credit for. She had a degree in art history, but Paolo had forced her to give up her career when they married. She had been isolated, belittled, and broken down, but she had not been destroyed. As the days passed, Elara and Clara grew closer. They took walks together, shared meals in quiet corners, and talked about everything except the secret Elara was carrying. Elara learned that Clara's father, Samuel, had died when she was a teenager, and her mother had passed away soon after. She had been alone in the world until she met Paolo, and she had married him not out of love, but out of a desperate need for security. It was a decision she regretted every day. "They think I'm nothing," Clara said one evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the river. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold and rose. Paolo, Isabella, all of them. They think I'm just a fat, useless wife who can't even give them an heir. And maybe they're right. "They're not right," Elara said, her voice fierce. "You are not nothing, Clara. You are more than they will ever understand." Clara looked at her, her eyes glistening. "Why are you being so kind to me? No one is kind to me here." Elara hesitated. She wanted to tell Clara everything, right then and there, but she knew she couldn't. Not yet. "Because I know what it's like to be underestimated," she said finally. "To be judged by your body instead of your mind. To be invisible. And I think you deserve better." Clara reached out and took Elara's hand. Her touch was warm, and it sent a jolt through Elara's body that she had not expected. She had been so focused on the work, on the secrets, that she had not allowed herself to feel anything else. But sitting here, with Clara's hand in hers, she felt something shift. The days until the merger ceremony were dwindling. Elara worked feverishly, compiling her evidence, creating a presentation that would be undeniable. She had documents, photographs, DNA analysis. She had surreptitiously collected samples from Alessandro's discarded coffee cup and Clara's hairbrush, and the results were conclusive. Alessandro was not a Vitale. Clara was. She had Rosa's letters, the hospital records, the immigration files. She had everything she needed to bring the Vitale empire crashing down. But she also had a growing sense of dread. Don Emilio was not a man who would accept this news calmly. He had built his life on the foundation of his bloodline. To learn that his son was not his son, that his grandson was not his grandson, would be a blow that could destroy him. And he would not go down alone. He would take Elara with him, and possibly Clara too. She needed allies. She thought about Alessandro. He had warned her. That first day in the archive. Did he know the truth? She decided to confront him. She found him in the gym, a converted ballroom filled with weights and punching bags. He was alone, his shirt soaked with sweat, his fists wrapped in tape as he pounded a heavy bag. He stopped when he saw her, his chest heaving. "Miss Vance," he said, unwrapping his hands. "You've been avoiding me." "I've been working," she said, "and I need to ask you something." "Ask." She took a deep breath. "What did you mean when you said some bones are buried for a reason?" Alessandro's face went still. He walked to a bench and sat down, gesturing for her to join him. She did, keeping a careful distance between them. "I meant," he said slowly, "that I know I'm not a Vitale." The words hung in the air between them. Elara felt the world tilt. "You know? I've known for years. My mother, Lucia, the woman who raised me, she told me on her deathbed. She said she couldn't die with the lie. She told me that Marco wasn't my real father, that I was adopted, that the whole thing was a sham, orchestrated by my grandmother Rosa. She made me swear never to tell my grandfather. She said it would kill him. And you kept that secret. What choice did I have?" Alessandro's voice was bitter. "I was raised to be the heir. I was trained, educated, groomed for this life. If I told the truth, I would lose everything. My family, my position, my identity. And for what? To satisfy some abstract notion of blood purity. The Castellanos are the ones who care about bloodlines, not me. I've tried to be a good leader, a good grandson. I've tried to earn my place." Elara's mind was racing. But the merger, if the Castellanos find out. "They won't find out," Alessandro said, his eyes hardening. "Unless you tell them." "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning. My grandfather is not a patient man. If you present your findings at the ceremony, if you expose this, people will die. Maybe you, maybe me, maybe innocent people caught in the crossfire. Is that what you want?" Elara stood up, her heart pounding. "What I want is the truth. I didn't ask for this, Alessandro. I was hired to do a job. And the truth is that you are not the rightful heir. Clara Rossi is." Alessandro's face went pale. "Clara? Paolo's wife? She's the daughter of your father's twin brother, the twin that Rosa left behind in Naples. She is the true blood, Vitale, the direct descendant of Rosa and Emilio's legitimate line. She has more right to this family than you do." Alessandro was silent for a long moment. Then he laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Clara, the one everyone ignores, the one Paolo treats like dirt. She's the real heir." "Yes." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than arrogance in his eyes. She saw fear. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," Elara admitted. "But I know what I should do. I should tell Clara. She deserves to know who she is." She deserves to claim her birthright. And if she does, what happens to me? That's not for me to decide. Elara left the gym with her mind in turmoil. She had expected Alessandro to be an enemy, but he was just another victim of Rosa's deception. He had built his entire life on a lie, and now that lie was crumbling. She almost felt sorry for him. But her sympathy for Alessandro did not change the facts. Clara was the true heir, and Clara deserved to know. That night, Elara went to Clara's room. It was a small, cramped space in a forgotten corner of the mansion, far from the grand suites occupied by the rest of the family. Clara opened the door in a worn bathrobe, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face bare of makeup. She looked surprised to see Elara, but she smiled and invited her in. The room was sparse but tidy, with a few personal touches: a photograph of Clara's parents on the nightstand, a stack of art books on the desk, a half-finished painting on an easel by the window. It was a portrait of a woman, strong and proud, with Clara's eyes. "Is everything okay?" Clara asked, gesturing for Elara to sit on the bed. Elara sat, her satchel heavy on her lap. "Clara, I need to tell you something that's going to change your life." Clara's smile faded. "You're scaring me." "I don't mean to scare you, but you deserve the truth." Elara opened her satchel and began to lay out the documents. The hospital records, the letters, the DNA results, the family tree she had drawn, with Clara's name at the top, connected by a red line to Rosa and Emilio Vitale. She explained everything: Rosa's infertility, the trip to Naples, the twin boys, the switch, Marco's false identity, Alessandro's lack of blood connection, and Clara's true heritage, the second twin, the forgotten child who had been left behind, but whose bloodline had survived. Clara listened in silence, her face growing paler with each revelation. When Elara finished, Clara picked up the photograph of her parents, her hands trembling. "My father," she whispered. "He was a Vitale? All this time he was a Vitale, and he never knew?" "He never knew," Elara confirmed. "The adoption records were sealed. The missionaries who raised him probably had no idea of his true origins." Clara set the photograph down and looked at Elara, her eyes filling with tears. "All my life, I've felt like I didn't belong, like I was on the outside looking in. And now you're telling me that I belong here more than any of them? That I'm the real Vitale?" "You are," Elara said, "and you have a choice to make. You can keep this secret, and nothing will change. You'll go on being ignored and mistreated by Paolo and the rest of them. Or you can claim your birthright. You can stand up at the merger ceremony and demand what is yours." Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "If I do that, they'll destroy me. Don Emilio, Isabella, Paolo, they'll never accept me. They'll say the documents are forged, that you're lying, that I'm just a gold digger trying to steal their fortune." "They might," Elara admitted, "but the evidence is solid. I've triple-checked everything, and you won't be alone. I'll be there. I'll present the findings myself. I'll stand beside you." Clara looked at her, and in that look, Elara saw something shift. The shy, beaten-down woman was still there, but underneath her, something else was stirring, something fierce. "Why are you doing this?" Clara asked. "You could have just taken your fee and left. You could have given Don Emilio a sanitized report and walked away rich. Why are you risking everything for me?" Elara reached out and took Clara's hand. "Because I've spent my whole life being told I'm not enough. Not thin enough, not pretty enough, not important enough. And I see the same thing happening to you. But you are enough, Clara. You are more than enough. And I think the world needs to see that." Clara's fingers tightened around Elara's. "Thank you," she whispered. "No one has ever believed in me before." They sat together in the quiet room, holding hands, and Elara felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the thrill of discovery. It was something deeper, something she had not felt in a very long time. Connection, understanding, maybe even the beginning of something more. The night before the merger ceremony, the mansion was a hive of activity. Servants rushed through the halls, arranging flowers and polishing silver. The grand ballroom was being transformed into a ceremonial hall, with a stage at one end and rows of chairs for the guests. The Castellano family would arrive at noon, and the ceremony would begin at 1. Elara barely slept. She spent the night in the archive, going over her presentation one last time. She had created a digital slideshow, projecting the documents onto a large screen so that everyone could see the evidence for themselves. She had practiced her speech, honing it to be clear, concise, and devastating. She knew that once she started speaking, there would be no going back. At dawn, she went to the kitchen to get coffee and found Alessandro waiting for her. He looked like he hadn't slept either. His eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw tight. "I need to talk to you," he said. "I'm listening." "I've been thinking about what you said, about Clara, about the truth." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. "I've spent my whole life trying to be the perfect Vitale heir. I've done things I'm not proud of. I've hurt people. I've lied. And for what? To protect a legacy that was never mine." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'm tired. I'm tired of the lies. I'm tired of the violence. I'm tired of being someone I'm not." He met her eyes, and she saw something she had not seen before: vulnerability. "I want to help you. I want to help Clara. I want to make this right." Elara studied him, searching for deception, but all she saw was a man on the edge of a precipice, looking for a way down. "How? I'll stand with you at the ceremony. I'll confirm everything you say. I'll tell them that I knew, that I've known for years. It will give your evidence more weight, and it will protect Clara. If I abdicate publicly, if I acknowledge her as the true heir, it will be harder for my grandfather to deny it." "Your grandfather will never forgive you." "I know," Alessandro said, "but maybe that's okay. Maybe I don't need his forgiveness. Maybe I need to forgive myself." Elara felt a surge of respect for him. It took courage to walk away from power, especially power that had been handed to you on a silver platter. "Okay," she said, "we'll do it together." The morning passed in a blur of preparations. Elara, dressed in her best suit, a deep burgundy that complemented her curves and made her feel powerful. She pinned her hair up carefully, applied a touch of makeup, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman who stared back was not the same woman who had arrived at the mansion 2 weeks ago. That woman had been nervous, uncertain, desperate for the fee. This woman was ready to burn down an empire. She met Clara in the hallway. Clara was wearing a simple green dress, but she had done something different with her hair, pulling it back from her face in a way that accentuated her cheekbones. She looked beautiful, and more than that, she looked determined. "Are you ready?" Elara asked. Clara nodded. "I'm terrified, but I'm ready." They walked together to the ballroom. The room was packed with people. Vitale relatives in their finest clothes, Castellano delegates in dark suits, lawyers, accountants, and at the center of it all, Don Emilio, seated on a throne-like chair on the stage. Isabella stood beside him, her face a mask of smug satisfaction. Paolo was there too, already drunk, leering at a serving girl. The ceremony began. Don Emilio gave a speech about family, about legacy, about the strength of the Vitale bloodline. He spoke of Alessandro as his pride and joy, the future of the family. He spoke of the merger as the dawn of a new era. The Castellano Don, a stern man with a scarred face, nodded along, his eyes cold and calculating. Then it was Elara's turn. She walked onto the stage, her heels clicking on the polished wood. She carried her laptop and a folder of documents. The room fell silent, all eyes on her. She could feel the weight of their gazes, the curiosity, the disdain. Isabella smirked. Paolo snorted. Don Emilio watched her with those winter slate eyes, his expression unreadable. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elara began, her voice steady, "I was hired by Don Emilio Vitale to trace the Vitale bloodline and verify the legitimacy of Alessandro Vitale as the direct descendant of the founding family. I have spent 2 weeks examining the family archives, cross-referencing church records, immigration files, hospital documents, and DNA evidence. What I have found is not what anyone expected." She clicked a button, and the first slide appeared on the screen, the official family tree, with Alessandro's name at the bottom, connected to Marco, connected to Emilio. "This is the family tree, as it is commonly understood," she said, "but it is not accurate." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Don Emilio's eyes narrowed. Elara clicked to the next slide, the hospital record from Naples, the mismatched footprints. "This is the birth record of Marco Vitale, filed in a clinic in Naples in 1965. Note the footprint. Now compare it to the footprint on Marco's official birth certificate, filed in the United States. They do not match. 2 different babies." The murmur grew louder. Isabella stepped forward. "This is ridiculous. What are you trying to imply?" "I am not implying anything," Elara said calmly. "I am presenting facts. Rosa Vitale, Don Emilio's late wife, was unable to carry a pregnancy to term. She traveled to Naples in 1965, where she arranged to adopt a newborn boy from a local woman. She falsified the records to pass the child off as her own, as Don Emilio's son. That child was Marco Vitale." She clicked to the next slide. Rosa's letters, projected in high resolution. These letters, written by Rosa herself, confirm the deception. She writes about her infertility, her fear of being cast aside, and her decision to take another woman's child. She also writes about a second child, a twin brother, who was left behind in an orphanage. The room was in chaos now. People were shouting, standing up, demanding explanations. Don Emilio had risen from his chair, his face pale with shock. Alessandro stood motionless, his eyes fixed on Elara. "The twin brother," Elara continued, raising her voice over the din, "was adopted by an American couple and raised in Ohio. He grew up, married, and had a daughter. That daughter is here, in this room, today." She clicked to the final slide, the shadow family tree, with Clara's name at the top, connected by a bold red line to Rosa and Emilio. "Clara Rossi," Elara said, turning to where Clara stood at the edge of the stage. "Wife of Paolo Vitale. She is the true blood heir, the direct descendant of Rosa and Emilio Vitale, the rightful leader of this family." For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then the room erupted. Paolo lunged forward, his face purple with rage. "You lying bitch. Clara is nothing. She's my wife, my property, and she has no claim to anything." Isabella was screaming at her father, demanding that Elara be thrown out, arrested, killed. The Castellano delegates were on their feet, their hands moving toward their jackets. Don Emilio stood frozen, his eyes moving from the screen to Clara to Alessandro and back again. And then Alessandro stepped forward. "It's true," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "All of it. I've known for years that I'm not a Vitale by blood. My mother told me on her deathbed. I kept the secret to protect my grandfather, to protect the family, but I can't do it anymore. Clara is the true heir. I renounce my claim." Don Emilio staggered, his cane clattering to the floor. Alessandro. No. I'm sorry, grandfather, Alessandro said. But it's time for the truth. Clara stepped onto the stage, her head high, her eyes blazing. She looked at Paolo, at Isabella, at all the relatives who had mocked and ignored her. I didn't ask for this, she said, her voice clear and strong. But I will not run from it. I am a Vitale. The blood of this family runs in my veins, and I will claim what is mine. The Castellano Don, who had been watching the chaos with a calculating expression, stood up. This merger is off, he announced. We will not ally ourselves with a family that cannot even keep its own bloodline straight. You have wasted our time, Emilio. He turned and walked out, his delegates following. The Vitale relatives were in disarray, some crying, some shouting, some simply staring in disbelief. Don Emilio sank back into his chair, his face ashen, looking every one of his 78 years. Elara stepped back, her part done. She watched as Clara faced down the family, as Alessandro stood beside her in a gesture of solidarity, as the world she had known crumbled and reformed into something new. It took hours for the dust to settle. The Castellanos left, the merger in ruins. The Vitale lawyers descended, demanding to see the evidence, questioning Elara, questioning Clara, questioning everything. But the evidence held. The DNA was conclusive. The documents were authentic. Clara Rossi was the rightful heir, and there was nothing anyone could do to change that. Paolo tried to assert his authority as Clara's husband, claiming that her inheritance was his by marital right. But Clara, with a strength that surprised everyone, told him that their marriage was over. She had endured his abuse for years, but she would endure it no longer. She would take her birthright, and she would take it alone. Isabella raged and plotted, but without her father's support, she was powerless. Don Emilio retreated to his study, refusing to see anyone. The family was fractured, perhaps beyond repair. In the midst of the chaos, Elara found Clara in the garden, sitting on the bench where they had talked so many times before. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Clara looked exhausted but peaceful. How are you feeling? Elara asked, sitting down beside her. Like I've been hit by a truck, Clara said with a weak laugh. But also, free. For the first time in my life, I feel free. You were incredible up there, Elara said. The way you stood up to Paolo, to Isabella. I've never seen anything like it. I couldn't have done it without you, Clara said. She turned to face Elara, her eyes soft. You gave me the truth. You gave me my identity. You gave me my life back. How can I ever repay you? Elara shook her head. You don't owe me anything. I was just doing my job. No, Clara said. You were doing more than your job. You believed in me when no one else did. You saw me when everyone else looked through me. That's not just a job. That's... She hesitated, then reached out and took Elara's hand. That's something else. Elara's heart skipped a beat. Clara's hand was warm in hers, and the touch sent a shiver through her body. She looked at Clara, really looked at her, and saw not just a client or a friend, but a woman of incredible strength and beauty. A woman who had been broken, and was now putting herself back together. A woman who made Elara feel things she had not felt in years. Clara, she began. But Clara leaned forward and kissed her. It was a soft kiss, gentle and questioning, as if Clara was asking permission. Elara responded without thinking, her hand coming up to cup Clara's cheek, her lips parting. The kiss deepened, and Elara felt a rush of emotion. Desire, yes, but also tenderness, protectiveness, and a fierce joy that she had found this woman, this incredible woman, in the most unlikely of places. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Clara's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. "I've wanted to do that for days," Clara admitted. "Ever since you first talked to me in the library. I didn't know if you felt the same way." "I didn't know either," Elara said. "I was so focused on the work, on the secret. But yes, I feel the same way." They sat together as the sun set, holding hands, talking about the future. Clara would need to navigate the legal and political fallout of her new status. The Vitale organization was in shambles, and it would take years to rebuild. But Clara was determined to do it differently, to run the family businesses legitimately, to break the cycle of violence and corruption that had defined the Vitales for generations. "I want you to stay," Clara said. "I know you have your own life, your own work, but I need someone I can trust, someone who sees the truth, someone who sees me." Elara thought about her mother's house, the medical debts, the lonely apartment in Old Verona Heights. She thought about the life she had been living, a life of quiet desperation, of digging through other people's histories, because her own felt so empty. And she thought about Clara, about the way Clara looked at her, about the possibility of a future together. "I'll stay," she said, "for as long as you need me." Clara smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face. "I need you forever." The days that followed were a whirlwind. The story of the Vitale family's downfall made headlines across the city. Clara Rossi, the forgotten plus-size cousin, was suddenly the most talked-about woman in the underworld. Some dismissed her as a pretender, a pawn of the genealogist. Others saw her as a symbol of hope, proof that the old ways could be overturned. Clara received threats, but she also received offers of alliance from families who had been enemies of the Vitales for generations. Alessandro kept his word. He publicly abdicated and left the city, seeking a new life, far from the shadow of the family. Lara heard later that he had enrolled in a university, studying history, a fitting choice for a man who had spent his life running from his own. Don Emilio never recovered from the shock. He retreated to a villa in the countryside, a broken man, his legacy in ruins. Isabella tried to mount a coup, rallying the old guard against Clara, but without her father's backing, she failed. She was exiled from the family, her assets frozen, her power stripped. Paolo, furious and humiliated, tried to contest the divorce, but Clara's new lawyers, the best money could buy, made short work of him. He was left with nothing, a bitter, drunken shell of a man. And Elara and Clara began to build a life together. It was not easy. The Vitale organization was a tangled web of illegal enterprises, and Clara was determined to dismantle them all. She faced resistance from within and without. There were attempts on her life, betrayals from people she had trusted, moments when she wanted to give up. But Elara was always there, steady and strong, her mind sharp, her heart loyal. Elara became Clara's consigliere, her advisor, her partner in every sense of the word. She used her genealogical skills to map not just bloodlines but alliances, tracing the connections between families, identifying threats and opportunities. She became known as the archivist, a woman who could find any secret, uncover any lie. The underworld learned to fear her as much as they feared any gun. But it was not all darkness. There were quiet moments too, mornings in the garden, drinking coffee and talking about art, evenings by the fire, reading aloud from old books, nights in each other's arms, discovering the depths of their passion. Elara had never thought of herself as a romantic person, but with Clara, she found a love that was both fierce and tender, a love that made her feel seen and cherished in a way she had never imagined possible. 1 year after the merger ceremony, Clara held a gathering at the mansion. It was not a celebration of power, but a celebration of survival. The guests were a mix of old allies and new friends, people who had proven their loyalty. The ballroom, once the site of Elara's greatest triumph, and the family's greatest shame, was now filled with laughter and music. Clara stood on the stage, Elara at her side. She was wearing a stunning red gown that hugged her curves, her hair cascading over her shoulders. She looked like a queen, not the cold, cruel queens of the old regime, but a queen of a new era, one built on truth and justice. "A year ago," Clara said, her voice carrying through the room, "I was invisible. I was a joke. I was the fat wife of a worthless man, and everyone in this family treated me like I was nothing. But one person saw me. One person believed in me. One person gave me the truth, and that truth set me free." She turned to Elara, her eyes shining. "Elara Vance, you came here to trace a bloodline, but you ended up tracing the line of my heart. You showed me that family is not just about blood. It's about love and loyalty, and the people who stand by you when the whole world is against you. I owe you everything, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me." She dropped to one knee, and the room gasped. From her pocket, she pulled out a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a ring, a simple band of gold with a single, perfect diamond. "Elara Vance," Clara said, "will you marry me?" Elara's hand flew to her mouth. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She had faced down Mafia dons, uncovered century-old secrets, and stood firm against a family that wanted to destroy her. But this undid her completely. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Clara slid the ring onto Elara's finger and stood, pulling her into a kiss. The room erupted in applause, and for the first time in the history of the Vitale mansion, the cheers were genuine. Later that night, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the river, Elara looked at the ring on her finger and marveled at the strange turns her life had taken. She had come to this house expecting to find dusty records and faded ink. Instead, she had found a conspiracy, a hidden heir, and the love of her life. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked, wrapping her arms around Elara from behind. "I'm thinking about Rosa," Elara said, "the matriarch who started all of this. She made a terrible choice, a choice born of fear and desperation. But in a strange way, her choice led to this, to us. If she hadn't switched those babies, you and I might never have met." Clara rested her chin on Elara's shoulder. "Maybe, or maybe fate would have found another way. I like to think that some things are meant to be." "A genealogist who believes in fate?" Elara teased. "That's very unscientific." "A genealogist who fell in love with a Mafia princess," Clara countered. "That's very unscientific too. But here we are." "Here we are," Elara agreed. She turned in Clara's arms and kissed her, slow and deep, savoring the taste of her, the feel of her body pressed against her own. The river glittered below them. The city spread out like a tapestry of lights, and the future stretched ahead, full of uncertainty, but also full of hope. They had torn down an empire built on lies. Now they would build something new, something true, together. The plus-size genealogist and the forgotten cousin. The woman who dug up the past, and the woman who was the future. They were an unlikely pair, but they were unstoppable. And as they stood on that balcony, wrapped in each other's arms, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. History, Elara thought, was not just a record of what had been. It was a map to what could be. And she had finally found her place on that map, not as a footnote, but as a main character, not as an observer, but as a participant, not as a woman defined by her size, but as a woman defined by her courage, her intelligence, and her capacity to love. The night was warm, the stars were bright, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled, marking the hour. It was the same bell that had rung for Rosa's secret wedding, for Marco's false baptism, for Alessandro's hollow christening. But tonight, it rang for them, for Elara and Clara, for a new beginning, and it sounded like victory.